You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Lisa back.
Maria, welcome to the show. I've wanted to talk to you for ages. I'm glad we finally made this happen. First things first, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Here in sunny California, just hanging out, waiting so that I can get to Japan.
Ah, yes, of course. You're at the Virtual Cantina on the Thursday night?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
They're a good crowd.
Yeah, I did one event with them here a few months back, and so I'm looking forward to doing this one.
Have you done Japan before? It's my first time. Have you ever been over there before?
No, I've never been to Japan. It's kind of lucky that Celebration Weekend always falls on my daughter's birthday. So last time, 2 years ago, I got to take her to London for her birthday. Yeah. This year I get to take her, and she's always wanted to go to Japan. So it's, we've been saving for this for quite some time.
It's going to be so different for us going to the States to do an American show. We've done a few times, and obviously when it's here, it's London, which is basically a different country to the rest of England anyway. But Japan is like completely alien in that sense. So we're very much looking forward to that. I'm,
a little overwhelmed because there's so many like Facebook groups where people are talking about like all the cards you need to have to get on the train, and then just everything, like, do you need cash for this, and you can't go with a tattoo here, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you know what, forget it. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna see what happens. And we're gonna have a few days in Tokyo, a few days at Disney, and then the event.
Brilliant. Well, before we get into a little chat about your career, we met about 18 months ago at the Galactic Starcruiser.
Yes.
Which was certainly a surprise to me as we were getting ready to disembark, and I spotted a lady sitting opposite who had some crew gear on and some cool tattoos, and I think a conversation started. So what did you make of that? Because you, as somebody who's done the experience, must see people's misconceptions of that whole thing and want to pull your hair out like I do, because it's so difficult to explain just how cool that whole thing was. How was it for you?
It's very difficult to explain. That was the second time I'd gone on it. And I have to say, obviously, in a way, I'm their target audience because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. But in a way, I was completely not their target audience, because I feel like it's for people who, we have Batuu West, we have Batuu East. You can kind of go be in Star Wars. But for people who don't go to set every day and see these sets and these costumes and just the visual of it all, going on the Starcruiser was like a really immersive, like you felt like you were actually there. Totally. And for me, I was like, oh yeah, I'm here every day.
Yeah, that's true.
But what I did really, really enjoy was seeing it through other people's eyes and getting to watch how involved people got and how excited people got. And the aspect of it, I think that some of the best actors I've ever seen in my entire life, considering what they had to do, in the span of 48 hours to interact with all those people, remember all those names and all the storylines and all the plot things, and also weed out the annoying people and make sure some people got attention that weren't getting attention.
Yeah,
that in general was really, really incredible to see, and how well people stayed in character and in performance. And I tell people, I try to explain it to them, and I say it's like if there was a hotel that was also at the same time a dinner theater and an escape room, but it was all Star Wars. I think it's a great business model, and I think it could work for a lot of things. I think it's just not cost effective to do it the way they did it.
It was fantastic, and like you say, it's difficult to explain it. That's probably the best description of it I've heard so far, because it's so far from just being a hotel. It's no more being a hotel than sleeping on the plane going on holiday. It's a totally different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, the hotel part of it wasn't even the fun part of it.
So you mentioned you're a long-time Star Wars fan and you work and are involved in the galaxy. How did that all come about? Where was your sort of first entry into this whole thing?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I discovered Star Wars like everyone else. In 1977, I was 6 years old, and my sister and I walked to the movie theater in our small town 14 times that summer to see the movie. And, of course, Christmas, everything was Star Wars themed, and it sort of just became a sort of a family affair for us, myself and my mother. Not my mother couldn't care, but my father and my sister and I really, really shared a love of the show. And I'm one of those fans. When I go hard. Like, I have some staple obsessions in my life, and Star Wars has always been one of them. And I had happened to be, it was in New Orleans, I think, on a movie, and I decided to go get a Princess Leia tattoo. And when I got back to Los Angeles, I was talking with a friend and showed her my tattoo, and she said, "Oh my gosh, you should get in touch with my boyfriend because he's about to start a series here in LA." And I said, "What do you mean, a series?" And she said, "Well, he's gonna do a TV show." I said, "What kind of TV show?" She said, "Well, I can't really tell you, but you're going to want to talk to him." And I said, "Okay." And she's like, "Just trust me, you're going to want to talk to him." So I said, "Okay." I said, "There's no way it could be Star Wars. They don't film Star Wars in the States. Are you kidding me? They're TV show. That's not happening." But anyway, I touched base with this guy who I've known for quite some time, and set up a meeting, and he explained to me what it was. And I basically, was screaming in the back of my head the whole time saying, "Don't mess this up." I just told him, I said, "You could probably find 20, 30 more people in this town who have bigger resumes than I do, who have done bigger TV shows, who have done bigger celebrities, who have more experience with all of this." I said, "But you're not going to find anybody that knows the subject matter. I'm just one of those sort of encyclopedic nerds about things." And, and I said, you really need to give me this job." And so he brought me to a meeting with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. And, once they approved me, I was in, and it was just kind of like one of those weird things about just sort of all of a sudden being kind of where I was meant to be. I just felt like I knew what to do.
Hi, this is Ethan Sachs, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
In your profession, you're probably looking at things in probably a more granular way than I might look at something. You're looking at, I'm picking a character. You're looking at Leia's hair in Return of the Jedi in Jabba's palace in a way that I'm not looking at her hair. So you could probably, I'm assuming, sit down with John and Dave and sort of say, "Well, I kind of get this, I kind of get that." Was that one of the hooks that got you into it, that you understood these things?
I think so. I think it was really important to John that the people working on this project were fans. I'm sure there were plenty of people on our show that had maybe never even seen a Star Wars movie or had seen one once. But by the time we all worked together for 7 years, everybody knew everything about everything and or at least appreciated it. But, there were often times when we'd be approaching new territory, whether it be with the look of a character, or whether it be with a plot point, or whether it be with a whatever. And it was great that everybody sort of had an opinion, and you kind of knew that the people that you were surrounded by would have the answer. It's like they were entrusting this franchise to people who cared about it as more than just a money-making franchise. Some people really were invested in the characters and wanted to do good by George and wanted to do good by all the legacy characters and, Mark Hamill. And, when it came to time to bringing Hayden in and, making these people feel welcome and at home and like they had value besides just the Disney franchise cash cow. And I think it was just important to them that they knew that the people that were working there felt it was something bigger than just a job. At the end of the day, we're all there for the same reason. We're all there to make a paycheck. It's what we do. But, a lot of us that were there were people who also, in their spare time did things like go to the Starcruiser. So
yeah, because you're familiar with Star Wars and you sounds like we're the same age, so kind of grow up with it. And then you're in a scenario where how to make Hayden's hair look like it did in Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones, but also how to help craft a new character and for it to feel like it completely belongs in the Star Wars galaxy. So that's a skill set you can't buy, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a bit of a learning curve with that. At the beginning, because it's like in any job as a hairstylist, we want to have fun and we want to kind of show off and do cool stuff. It would have been fun to be able to do crazy Padme Amidala hairdos every day or whatever. But on the other hand, it was television, not film. There were time restraints, there were financial restraints, and you had to make a character that was also a little more believable than an animated character, and also something that I kept in mind a lot about, cosplayers. People are going to want to dress like this character. They're going to make a doll out of this character. So you had to keep some of those things in mind.
Is that a consideration? You mentioned costumers, and when you go to the Starcruiser, you see all the people putting the effort in there, and then you go to an event. When you're in Japan at Virtual Cantina, you'll see people, when you see people at Celebration, you'll see folks walking around with hairstylings that you've had a hand in. So is that a satisfying thing as a fan as much as a professional?
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I didn't realize it quite as much at the beginning because, I don't think you realize the scope of it's such a part of our cultural world and has been for so long. And there's really nothing else that is quite that big, something that's crossed divides for so many years that you don't realize that even being a small part of it, that you're making a ripple in this big, huge ocean, that it's going to actually eventually get to someone else's shore. I remember the first time I saw Fennec Shand in cosplay and I was like, oh my God, this is like, I did that. And then this person's, that I went up to her and apologized. Sorry. I was having a good time that day.
Yeah. So when you say about Fennec, I was thinking of Fennec earlier, and you mentioned animation. So you've worked on Ming-Na and got the hair, and everybody's okayed it, and then you see the Bad Batch when Fennec turns up. How cool was that for you to see that translated really into a different?
I mean, anytime I see it in animation or even just a Funko, I mean, I have a huge collection of Funko Pops. I designed this and I'll always have that. I mean, it'd be great to get a quarter every time they sell a Funko Pop. It's not going to happen. And even just going into the parks and seeing, they have a Fennec walking around or now they have a Sabine, or they did for a while, Sabine walking around.
Yeah.
Wow, this is really, really cool.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
You did season 1 and then season 2 and then Book of Boba, and things move on and things progress and advance in that sense. Once they wouldn't take you on if they were confident that you were going to nail it, of course. But how far in do you get to a point where I'm presuming that, there is designers and different people doing concept work, but then there's drawing it. Like you said, animation's different to real life. So there's drawing it and then there's doing it. And you've got the consideration of if this performer's running around or jumping about, that's not going to work. Or how involved do you get with these sort of elements?
The hair department doesn't come on board. I mean, I know I have the job, but I'm not actually physically at the studio until about a month before production starts. And so there's been a lot, the costumes have all been established. There's been a lot of art that's been done by Doug Chang and his team and all this concept work. And then I'm brought in and then, we talk about everything and, I find out how much they really want it to look like the concept art or, or if there's a real specific idea in mind, like Sabine. Dave had a very, very specific progression in mind for her hair and the colors were colors he wanted. So that was something that I did because it was written on the page. But then for other characters like, Cara Dune, I mean, the first concept art of her, which you can see in one of the Mandalorian books is, I think they had her with a really, really short kind of a buzz cut. Yeah. And when Gina came in, she wasn't really comfortable with that. And so it was like, well, let's do this or let's do this or, and so the tests, it's, 95% already there. Well, not 95% already there, but it's it's at least 70% there by the time I even show up.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm not going to change Bo-Katan's hair. Bo-Katan is Bo-Katan. I do present them with ideas, but normally we just have a little bit of a chat, and I find out any parameters or any specifics they want for somebody. And then we do a lot of tests. We just do a lot of tests, and it's tests with the costumes, tests with the makeup, tests with the hair. And just seeing what we like on camera and what the actor's comfortable with and what the filmmakers are happy with and whoever's directing that episode and, make sure that it makes sense for the character, then go from there.
What was the most satisfying result? Was it a legacy character or was it a brand new character? Was there a moment when you just looked at that person with that whole look and thought, yep, nailed it?
It was definitely Anakin. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was high stakes for me. It was high stakes for me with the fans, but it was also just high stakes for me personally. And also just knowing the history of the fandom and the way they have treated Hayden over the years and how important it was to him that if he were to come back and do this, that it was done correctly. And so you sort of take that all on. And it's funny because if you look at people who cosplay Anakin, or even if you look at some of the animation, he doesn't really look like he really looks. Like if you really, really, really look at the footage of Revenge of the Sith, first of all, his hair was not dark brown. He has blonde curly hair. Really, it wasn't that long. You think of it and you think of this really long hair, but it really wasn't that long. And so it's just all these little nuances that it's like I had an idea in my mind of what I thought the character looked like, and then having to really delve into it and get into the really specifics of it. And luckily having Hayden there with me really, really helped because he knew what he needed to see and what felt right to him.
And when you do that research, obviously you're sitting with the actor who's probably not looked like that for 20 years in that instance. But what research do you do? Is there stuff in the archive? Where does that information come from?
I'm sure there's stuff in the archive. I don't know if there was any way for me to add. A lot of that's really difficult to access. Lucasfilm is they play very close to the chest with anything that wasn't seen on screen. For example, like if I'd asked for previous test photos of maybe his early on makeup and hair tests, I don't think I would have been given access to that information. However, I do know that Shauna Triptych was able to see some of the original costumes. So it's possible that if I had pushed, I could have gotten that far. But, the research was all there. I mean, it's all on camera. It's all been done. And it's in, hundreds of books and, behind the scenes videos and whatnot. So it was just a matter of sort of going down that rabbit hole and finding every shot that I could.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my co-host on the show is the commanding officer of the Rebel Legion here in the UK. And so he's constantly doing research on, specific types of stitching on a costume or whatever it might be. And there is a sort of a granular research part of the brain that Star Wars fans love to dig into. And it sounds like you went down that particular sort of rabbit hole for what you did. That must have been fascinating to even just that level of research.
It's really exciting. It's also really difficult because hair is not a it's a fabric, but it's a different type of fabric. It's not like you're making a costume where you're going to put the stitching in exactly the same place. Everything's got to read within whatever the context of the scene is. And like I said, too, you're dealing with face replacement to de-age. You're dealing with an actor they're going to have to tweak his voice slightly to make him sound slightly younger, all those things. But digitally, they can't really change the hair.
No.
It was kind of a big thing for that had to be exactly right in order for everything else to also sort of make sense, because you can sort of get away with maybe not de-aging quite as much or maybe not tweaking the voice quite as much if the audience is already believing it. If they're there 80%, then you've got them. But if the hair was wrong, you would have lost them at the very beginning, the second he walked on screen.
Framing it the way you have, they're putting a tremendous amount of trust in you. And also the actor, Hayden sitting down, I'm sure he's perfectly confident in everybody that's around him, but the ultimate goal, like you say, is to take us back to essentially to 2005 with an actor that's weathered really well. So, it probably wasn't that hard of a job, but nevertheless.
No, it was not difficult. He still looks exactly the same.
That's the ultimate goal, is to make us believe that was shot back in Sydney in 2003, and this is a cutscene you never saw, like the start of Dial of Destiny. That's the whole goal, isn't it?
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Doing that as well with the Luke character was also really exciting too, because both of those are very dated haircuts. Luke's haircut was very much of the 1977 time. Anakin's haircut was very, early 2000s. So it's kind of also making those look okay now, because not everything else in the scene, it's not like Luke was interacting with Han and you're seeing them both with these 70s haircuts. All of a sudden it was in a totally different, you're seeing them in a different perspective with different characters. So I had to look at it without the perception of what I thought it should look like and make sure it looked like it actually did look like, it was kind of a mind melt, because it was just like sometimes I'd see something and go, wait a second, it just doesn't look right. And luckily you have an encyclopedic brain with Dave Filoni, and he would always know exactly what needed to change, or Doug. Doug was really imperative with the Anakin stuff.
You say, obviously, Luke, was it Graham who played him on set?
Mm-hmm.
He's a younger actor. So I'm thinking of a weird angle here. What do you do in your profession if his head shape, because everyone's got a different shaped heads, if his head shape's not the same as, let's say, Mark Hamill's head shape, what do you do to make it just, do you know what I mean? To make it work? How do you get around things like that?
Well, first of all, I don't know if we're allowed to reveal all of these secrets, but we had him shave his head. And then the makeup artists actually put a prosthetic piece on him to slightly change his head shape.
And across the projects that you worked on, I mean, how many was it? It was Mando, Book of Boba, Ahsoka.
Yeah, and Mando and Grogu.
Mando and Grogu, yeah. Was there a moment as a fan, I'm speaking to you purely as a Star Wars fan now, was there a moment when you were on set in a moment that you can say, of course, there's things you can't talk about the film, but was there just a moment when you just pinch me, I can't believe I'm here?
Oh, there was a lot of those. The day that Vader was on set, I mean, that was crazy.
Wow.
Also, the day that Anakin and young Ahsoka were fighting the clones. So magical. And also, very, very early on in filming, we were on season 1, and George Lucas came to set. That particular day, we were filming the Bounty Hunter bar, and it was just like, okay, first of all, I'm doing all these crazy, cool bounty hunter characters, that we got to really have fun with. And then George Lucas was on set, and it was just like, is this my life right now? Like, what is going on here? It was really surreal.
That's fantastic. Apart from Celebration, what's next for you?
I don't know what's next for me. I'm looking into a few things. I have some irons in the fire. I just signed with an agency. I have a movie coming out May 25th. It's the live action Lilo and Stitch.
Oh, fantastic.
Which I was not the only hairstylist on, but I did take over for the department head on all the reshoots for that. So I was in Hawaii last year for a few months. And that's going to be really fun. I don't know how much you've heard about the industry in California, but it's really in flux right now. We have a lot of, I wouldn't call them runaway productions, but we have a lot of productions that are going to the UK, Canada, Australia, Prague, places that are less expensive to film. Between the labor costs and the fact that we don't have socialized medicine, and also the fact that California is become very greedy when it comes to film permits and things like that, we've just kind of priced ourselves out. There's very, very little work here at the moment. So I'm not sure what's next for me. When the Halcyon was around, I was during the strikes here in LA, and as an alternate source of income, I started making hair pieces for people.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And so I've sort of taken that business model and I'm trying to kind of roll with it. This weekend, I'm doing a con. It's called the Inland Empire Strikes Back. It's in Riverside. It's a Star Wars specific con. And I'm taking hair pieces there for sale to see if there's any interest on that end. But I've got time, and it's something fun for me to do when I'm not on set. So been keeping busy with that. I would love to in the future continue working with Lucasfilm. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I could do that for the rest of my life and be perfectly happy. But we'll see what happens in the future with production here in Los Angeles, and if that's even possible.
Well, fingers crossed with everything. We'll see you in a few weeks in Japan, so I'll be sure to come over and say hi.
Yeah, I'll be around.
Good. And thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. I've wanted to speak to you for ages. Like I say, ever since the Halcyon, so I'm really pleased we've done this.
Well, it was a great chance encounter. I'm glad we were able to make it happen.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.